We are live, and we're with Trita this time, everybody. Unfortunately, the initial stream didn't have Trita forgot to put it in his calendar, apparently. But anyway, Trita, it's always a pleasure, my friend.
We're not supposed to share that with everyone.
No, I'm kidding.
No, it was my bad. It was my bad. I'm so sorry.
Fault, but here we are. Always a pleasure, as I say. But I'm very interested. So, simply put, what is going on right now with the talks? It seems like we're just, the term I use is merry-go-round, but we just seem to be in a merry-go-round right now. The two sides have struck each other. There's been some pressures on the Strait of Hormuz, obviously Lebanon and Israel is the main pressure point. But are we just, and Trump just saying that talks are progressing at rapid pace, but not rapid enough that we've actually reached an endpoint?
Merry-go-round is probably a good metaphor here. We haven't reached the end of this, but it is increasingly looking difficult. There's no doubt about that. There's news today that the Iranians suspended talks over Lebanon. That is not what I'm hearing from the Iranian side. There's been threats of doing so, but actually not a full suspension. And even if it was a suspension, it would just slow the pace of the talks rather than completely disrupt it, most likely. But it goes back to things that you and I have spoken about earlier on, which is the centrality of Lebanon and why the Iranians are insisting on a region-wide ceasefire. We're seeing it clearly how Lebanon may, or Israel's actions in Lebanon may end up becoming a major spoiler. I would say, however, that the main challenge at this point is actually cold feet on the Iranian side, driven to a very large extent by deep suspicions as to whether Trump is serious, whether this is just an effort to win time, to attack Iran, whether he actually can deliver on some of his promises that he's making. And some of those questions I think are legitimate, and given the fact that the Iranians have been attacked twice in the middle of negotiations, it's reasonable to understand that there's going to be a degree of paranoia on the Iranian side. But at the same time, the logic of some of these arguments, frankly, don't make sense. Because if Trump was looking for a way to restart the war, he doesn't need a deal. He doesn't need to have an excuse. He doesn't need to have a pretext. He'll just do it. There's no reason as to why they would be striking a deal and then a month after the midterms, that's when they would do it. There's no logistical or military logic as to why Trump would need to do anything along those lines. If he wanted to have another military confrontation, he'll have it. The reason why he doesn't want one or doesn't think he can have one is because I don't think he has any real attractive military options at his disposal. So I think we're in a situation in which Trump's own conduct, the manner in which he has been so untrustworthy, has really triggered the paranoia that exists on the Iranian side, which to a certain extent certainly is justified given their experience, but to a certain extent is just paralyzing them at this point. And they're having these moments in which they don't know whether to go forward or backwards on this. And there's an intense debate inside of Iran. And it's not that certain elements are holding out, the hardliners are against. It's a little bit more complex than that, in which there are serious question marks on their end. But some of those questions should have been asked in the beginning of the negotiations, not at this very last moment.
But is that more based on the internal reservations of the IRGC, of the Islamic Republic, or based on purely Trump's bipolarity, his sort of seemingly schizophrenia of what he says on one tweet versus another?
Certainly, Trump's own conduct has made it much more difficult. There is a tendency on the Iranian side to really read into a lot of what he says and take it very seriously and become very, very suspicious. But I've had conversations with folks on the other side, and it's interesting. At some point they say, well, we don't understand why he agreed to some of these things. It sounds too good to be true. So, when Trump is being flexible, that fuels their suspicion. When he's not being flexible, it fuels their suspicion. That's the scenario you have when you're kind of being paralyzed at a moment in which you need to make decisions. And, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add on that point, Trita, that sort of, do you think possibly the Iranians are thinking that they're dealing with someone who's got way more moves than he actually does? Like, as we've said before, the the Iranians are incredibly savvy diplomats and negotiators, and just generally about navigating remaining in power. So do you think that they could actually be overestimating the capacity of the Trump administration because of how much they are used to experiencing challenges?
You mean overestimating what Trump can do?
Yeah, over you know, he's got 4D chess, 5D chess, when actually he's just an idiot, and that's making them hesitant because they think, are there more moves than we've calculated for?
Yeah, no, I think every conversation I've had, at times I've been surprised by some questions that are being asked, because they really are reading way more into things than is the case. I'm not saying that Trump has not been deceptive. He absolutely has been. He's even bragged about it. Remember how he bragged about the deception last summer, in which he said, this was the biggest deception ever, and really that experience has put the Iranians where they are right now. And it's also backfiring on Trump, because he's living in a world in which his past untrustworthiness is affecting the perception of his current trustworthiness. And it's doing so in a manner in which, even when he has shown significant flexibility, it has made the Iranians suspicious. It has made them think, why is he giving so much? There must be an angle here. And when he's not giving much, they're like, well, he's pursuing this maximalist strategy. So again, I'm not saying that all of the fault is on the Iranian side or all the fault is on the American side, but I think there's certain things that have happened that is giving a misperception of the reality. So for instance, Trump suddenly said, the ball is back in my court. I'm going to take my time before I make a decision. I don't think the Iranians ever responded. I don't think the Iranians went back with an actual response to the US on the proposal. There may have been some exchanges of certain texts, but a full response was never given. But this was a way for Trump to deflate the pressure that was building up on him in Washington, in which people were increasingly asking the questions, what's going on here? The Iranians been sitting on their answer for 2 weeks. You say that they're desperate for a deal. That certainly doesn't seem to be the case. And a way for him to deflate that, he suddenly just made up, saying, the Iranians have responded and I'm going to sit on my answer until I really thought this through. That's a way to kind of say the ball is in my court. And that's a good thing. And it's much more difficult for the blob to pressure him to make a decision once the ball is in his court on diplomacy. And then it was if the ball was in the Iranian court, because then the immediate accusation would be they're playing for time, you're getting played, you're getting rolled, etc. But that all goes away if he suddenly declares that the ball is in his court, even if it wasn't. And so I don't doubt, for instance, that he may have gone back and tried to make some changes to the proposals. And that incidentally has fueled some suspicion on the Iranian side. But it's also something that the Iranian side should recognize. Part of the reason why he may be doing this, I'm not 100% sure about this, but this is my read of the situation, is because you didn't respond to the previous proposal. And during this period, he's been put under tremendous amount of pressure in Washington. So now he's trying to change some of these variables to make himself look better in Washington. But it is different from the original proposal, which he was happy with because the ball was in your court, but you didn't respond.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit. I was thinking about this earlier, and then I heard one expert. I don't know if you're familiar with her, Sanam Vakil of Chatham House.
Sanam and I did our PhDs together at Johns Hopkins.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, you're a citer as well. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Cool. Well, we're all the same tree. I love it. No, but Sanam, I think, put it really well, which is that despite what some people may say, Trita, the escalations that we see here, or the threats to the ceasefire, aren't really necessarily that strong. We see this quite often where you'll see flare-ups, we'll see violations, we'll see what I call pot shots, right? They take pot shots at each other occasionally, but the long-term strategic value of negotiating this ceasefire is more important than ditching it for a short-term reaction because you're frustrated from the Americans hitting targets or something, right? Bottom line, what does that tell you about the extent of either's rationale now? Regardless of how hot it gets, are we not going to see a breakage of this ceasefire, or do you think it is quite possible?
No, look, we absolutely can see it. I do agree that what has happened so far didn't get to the point in which the two sides necessarily were going to break it off, although it could have. I mean, I think the response the Iranians had by striking the bases in Kuwait. Again, we saw a pattern we've seen before. The Pentagon comes out and says nothing happened. 3 days later, there's a report saying that, well, there were some American casualties, injuries, not deaths, but it was because of falling debris, which then started to prompt a lot of jokes on the internet, because it seems like these drones' main function is to get shot at and then fall down on troops and cause casualties that way, rather than actually striking them, because it's just striking how many people seem to have been injured by the debris rather than the actual attack. And I think the picture is more that these were probably quite successful attacks. They didn't inflict significant damage. It was a way for the Iranians to say, okay, they're not going to accept a new reality in which the US can strike the Iranian mainland without getting significant retaliation from the Iranian side. And since that attack, to the best of my knowledge, we've seen a drop. Perhaps not a complete, but we've seen a drop. So it's not unusual in these different ceasefires that the two sides test each other, they probe, they escalate a little bit, but it's below the threshold of actually breaking the ceasefire. And again, if the US wanted to break the ceasefire, the US would. I'm not seeing anything, it's not public opinion, it's not even domestic opinion, certainly not international law that would be preventing the Trump administration from going forward with a full-scale attack if they thought that they had that option. I don't think they do. I think they recognize that they don't have that type of an escalatory option. However, if they had managed to maintain that low-level confrontation between the US and Iran, that actually would probably have eroded Iran's deterrence over the long run in a manner that would be very detrimental to the Iranians, which is probably why they responded a little bit more forcefully. Because it's at that level the US actually can inflict damage on the Iranians and still absorb any responses from Iran. Whereas if the US were to strike harder, for instance, going after oil infrastructure, that's when the Iranians would start exercising some of their escalatory options that would be devastating for the US. But if you keep yourself below that, then you actually could inflict a lot of damage on the Iranians over the period of time without risking that larger scale retaliation from the Iranians and without risking the ceasefire. And I think what the Iranians did is that they struck a little bit harder than expected to essentially say, no, that path is not going to work.
Yeah, it makes me think. I just want to read out what Trump had said earlier, because what I found quite fascinating was the nebulous nature of what he said. So he said, this is about Israel, because obviously I want to bring in this as a potential catalyst for breaking the ceasefire. But he simply said he had a very productive call with Netanyahu, and there will be, quote, no troops going to Beirut, and any troops that are on their way have already been turned back, end quote. Now, some geniuses thought that he meant American troops, which probably not. But I think the more savvy people realized that this was the United States president effectively dictating the military operations of another sovereign nation in Israel. And so this obviously triggered a lot of MAGA individuals. And I'm just quite curious, therefore, how do you interpret that? Is it, am I overreading this, or does it really expose sort of the power dynamics between Bibi and Trump, right? Some people say it's all driven by Israel's manipulation of Trump, but clearly Trump is putting his foot down with the extent that the Israelis can call the shots in this broader conflict.
Well, this is the second time he's done that in the context of Lebanon. He earlier on said that Israel does no longer have the permission to strike. And some of the bombardment against Lebanon, against Beirut was stopped. This goes back to what we started off talking about. The Iranians want to see that Trump is willing and capable of delivering restraint on Israel. Because if he cannot or will not, the value of a ceasefire is very questionable. And here we see that Trump is signaling that he's doing it, using strong language. It's not just a quiet measure or message to the Israelis behind the scenes, but also publicly, which may not necessarily be the smartest thing, but it may be something that the Iranians have requested. We've seen that Netanyahu has responded and essentially at least partially rejected this, saying that they will continue to attack if Hezbollah attacks them, which may be within the framework of an agreement. But then he says that other IDF activities will remain unchanged. And that may suggest that the pressure that Trump put on Netanyahu is not to go towards Beirut, but other than that, the activities that they're doing in the south of the country, short of that, may not be encompassed with what Trump has pushed on him. It may also be that this is something Netanyahu says to make it appear as if he's not caving to Trump, whereas in reality, on the ground, the Israelis may start ending some of those activities. I'm not holding my breath, it will remains to be seen. But a key element of this is Trump would never do this out of the goodness of his heart or because he just kind of grew tired of it. The only reality I can see in which he would be doing this is because it is directly tied to his effort to secure a deal from the Iranians and very public pressure by the Iranians to make sure that the fighting in Beirut and Lebanon ends. Now, a question that still remains is that when the Iranians are saying a ceasefire, it does not necessarily mean that that encompasses an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon. It may just mean that they freezes the conflict where it is right now. And that may not be necessarily what the Iranians ultimately want. It may be what they're asking for in the memorandum, but within the actual agreement later on, they may ask for more. Because otherwise, they may be cementing the conflict at a level that is quite beneficial to the Israelis. They're under control of significant parts of southern Lebanon. And because of the ceasefire, Hezbollah cannot do anything about that. So, there's details here that have to be worked out clearly.
Well, yeah. Do you think, I said this in the stream before, which, do you think that the Israelis are effectively squatting in Lebanon? Do you think that this could become a, season sort of occupation? They don't really leave unless the United States really puts pressure on them. Could we see that happening?
Oh, I have no doubt in my mind that the Israelis are planning on occupying large parts of southern Lebanon for a very long period of time, end up calling it a buffer zone, eventually annexing the buffer zone, and then needing a new buffer zone to protect that buffer zone. I mean, we've seen this pattern plenty of times. We're seeing it in Golan. Yeah, we're seeing it in Syria right now as well, in which the new buffer zone is to protect the Golan, which was the buffer zone at one point and eventually became accepted by the United States. So the Israelis have a playbook. Over time, if no one has the wherewithal and the military powers to challenge it, it ends up becoming accepted, particularly if Western states, as they so often do, end up accepting it. So I have no doubt that that is what the Israelis are aiming for. Whether they will end up succeeding or not will very much depend on what happens in this negotiation. If there isn't a negotiation, a deal, if there is a deal, what that deal entails, etc., etc.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the same old playbook to me. I used the Syrian example just, an hour ago in that stream. And I should also emphasize that we are streaming on Substack, guys. So do be sure to check out Trita's work on there as well as mine. We're doing more together across platforms now, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, Trita, I guess, my penultimate question is simply, how far can the Israelis go? How far do you think the Iranians can be pushed before they were like, okay, we've actually had enough, we are going to pull out? What would be their threshold?
I think to a certain extent, the Lebanon issue is very important to them. To a certain extent, I think it may be some elements in Tehran that are also using it as a pretext. There's been a threat made that if the Israelis restart attacks against Beirut, the Iranians will strike Israel. Whether they will act on that or not remains to be seen. But I can see, because there's a consensus within the system that a ceasefire in Lebanon is necessary for a deal, it could also then be turned into a pretext by those who actually don't want a deal at all, who believe that the deal is not trustworthy, not because they're against the deal in principle, not because they believe that the Islamic Republic internally has to be at war with the United States, but because they have genuine and deep question marks about the trustability of the US here, and that Lebanon ends up becoming where it all breaks down, partly because the US couldn't deliver Israel, partly because the Iranians, some elements there, thought that one more round of fighting may end up being to their benefit before there's any return to negotiations.
And the last question I have for you is that, just quick take from you, if you wouldn't mind, is simply, Iran has said that it's suspended talks with the US, according to Iranian state media, versus Trump saying they're rapidly progressing. Is this just rhetoric? Is it all untrue?
My understanding and the conversation I've had with folks is that the Iranians have not suspended it. They have threatened to suspend it. Washington Post reported that they had suspended and cited an unnamed Iranian official. That's not what I've been hearing. They certainly have threatened it. I don't think it's happened yet. Could it happen? It certainly could happen. But I think the suspension threat and the fact that they're using the word suspension, which means they're not breaking the talks, there is a pause until certain conditions change, rather than a complete break of the talks. So this is one step beyond what we've seen in the past, in which the ceasefire is challenged, but it's not at the threshold of actually completely breaking it. This is one step further, because within that ceasefire, they're temporarily pausing it. But to the best of my knowledge, they haven't paused it. They just threatened to do so.
Well, that came out in the last half an hour. But thanks, Trita. Always a pleasure with you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. You too.